handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman, Seat, over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder, Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2 1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4 7 tree 9er, 8 9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience. Very happy that you could come along for the ride. It was some time ago that we discussed a particular case, somewhere between, I would say, a takings law and poor landowners or homeowners and all kinds of things. And it's actually going to be heard at the Supreme Court. So Brian Hodges is with us from the Pacific Legal Foundation to give us kind of an update, because we like to do that. And tell everybody where things are on things that we've discussed here on the Denise Simon Experience. So, Brian, welcome, and thanks for taking some time out to talk about this case.
Thank you for having me.
I kind of want to go back here a little bit because we've certainly got some new listeners. This is a situation where an older woman who lives alone is an owner of about 90 acres in a rural area in Pennsylvania, and the family has owned this property for about, 90 years, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say 90 years, about 90 acres, but for several decades. And the county or some part of the local government there passed some ordinance that said, hey, we think that there's an ancient burial ground, so we're going to take part of your property so the public can walk on it and go see this graveyard. And they're not compensating her. Is that the 4-second summary of this case?
Yeah, that's pretty close. Let me just add a couple of facts.
Yeah, please.
Give it a little more color and detail. In this area of the country, it was very common for people to bury their family members on their property. So throughout the whole region, there are small family burial plots on private property. The township of Scott in western Pennsylvania adopted a first-of-its-kind law that said that, first, it just gives the government blanket right to enter anybody's property to go and try to find these. They call them antique grave sites, but it could be, Uncle Fred or great-uncle Bob. But it gives them the permission. They don't have to go to a court, get a warrant. They don't have to get your permission. It grants them the right to cross your property to look for these. And then once they find something that they suspect, they don't have to prove that it's a grave site. In this case, it's a pile of rocks. There's been no determination that there are any bodies in the ground that we're aware of. But once they make that determination, then they open up your property to the public to come and look at the rocks and take pictures, all daylight hours, 365 days a year. And making matters even worse, if you exercise your property rights and say fence them out, put up a no trespassing sign, chase someone off your property, you're subject to fines of up to $300 to $600 per day, 365 days a year.
Brian, this is on an assertion that we have this ordinance that happened after she was the property owner. So we don't, as you said, they don't even know what is there except we have some rocks. We don't even know if it's her family or if there is a family. So we have this ordinance that's applying to her with no evidence, right?
Well, even the evidence doesn't matter, because if there was a historic gravesite on the property, it's still her private property. And if the township wants to open it up for people to go and, engage in some historic recreation, then they need to purchase the property. They need to purchase the right to cross over that property, just like if they wanted to put a highway across her yard. They'd have to condemn it and pay her for it.
Or rent it from her or something.
Yeah, the Constitution is really clear in this regard, and this is one of the most plain examples of a taking that I've seen in recent years. The Constitution says, "Thou shalt not take private property without due process and just compensation."
And this poor woman's not exactly young, and she lives alone. So she has really no necessarily clue on how to protect her property against whoever may tread on it and even and cause some damage. I mean, if there's some damage, she's you know, somebody decides they're going to have a bonfire, or, you know, they're going to light off fireworks or something. I mean, this woman has no recourse, does she?
Well, this actually leads to the issue that's before the Supreme Court, is that she thought she did have a recourse, and that recourse was going to the federal court to say, hey, enforce the Fifth Amendment. Either strike this law or force them to pay me for the property. And that's why we're going up to the Supreme Court, is the federal court said, no, you're not allowed to come to us at this point and seek a remedy.
Huh?
Yeah, I know.
That's a technical term from a radio host, huh?
Well, it's really, that's about as appropriate as you can get when it comes to this rule. You see, it's about access to the courts. You know, the federal courts are there to secure the rights that individuals are guaranteed under the federal Constitution, to make sure that the states don't violate those rights. And every other right secured by the Constitution is directly enforceable in the federal courts. So say you want to protest, you go to get a permit and they say, well, we don't like your viewpoint, so we're not going to let you protest. You run right down to the federal court and you get an injunction. It's a one-day turnaround. Here, in 1985, there was a case called Williamson County v. Hamilton Bank, in which the Supreme Court adopted this sort of strange rule that says that before you can enforce your property rights, unlike all other rights, you have to go through this procedure of, you have to litigate your claims in a state court before you can go to the federal courts, which is not only duplicative, but it's very costly. There are a lot of reasons why people don't want to go to state courts. I mean, when you're going to challenge, you know, a locally supported ordinance like this one, you're going before the people from the community
that did it, right?
Yeah. So there's often good reasons. You know, that's not saying that state courts aren't the best place always, but often there's a good reason to go to the federal court to enforce your federal constitutional rights. And that's just to get out of the immediate community when you're challenging what could be a popularly supported law.
So she was kind of stuck, right? I mean, she wanted to go here and they said no. And then, you know, she was trying to, I mean, she's obviously not a lawyer. She doesn't necessarily have to know and learn all this stuff, but she thought, okay, did she have a lawyer at the time before you guys entered? Yeah. So.
Yeah, she had lawyers, and, you know, it's even more complicated than that, because she first tried to get an injunction at the state court, and the state court dismissed her case, saying it wasn't ready for their involvement. And then when the city or the township came back and said a second time that she's going to have to open up her property to the public, she took it to federal court. And at that point, PLF got involved, because we've been arguing this issue for pretty much as long as that case has been around, Williamson County, that citizens should have a right to go to the federal court. And we had developed our strategy for arguing what types of cases can go directly to the federal court. And when the federal court rejected our case, we took it to the U.S. Supreme Court. We took it up to the Federal Court of Appeals and then up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And they just granted review last week.
Okay, Brian. So we have this ordinance that happened after she was the property owner. Is this essentially a retroactive ordinance? I mean, she had the property long before this ordinance. The alleged antique gravesite that is a bunch of rocks was there before she probably even owned the property. So yes. How can an ordinance kind of reach back into history?
Well, that's exactly one of the things that the takings clause is supposed to protect against is, you know, when you purchase your property, you purchase the entire scope of rights.
Yeah.
The government can't go in later and redefine those rights and say that, So you own your property minus this gravesite and minus a public access easement to get to it. That's a taking. And you
so
know, I should actually point out too, when we were talking about this access to court issue, just thinking about the amount of lawyer hours that just went into even getting dismissed from 2 different courts would take the average person, could bankrupt the average person.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And also it dissuades people from enforcing their rights. You know, it's a war of attrition if you have to bounce between courts. So there are so many people valid claims like this case who never get the opportunity to even have a court hear them on their merits. It's staggering.
Well, I mean, and so you become almost I don't know, destructive, because you've pretty much decided, I can't afford this, so I'm not going to fight it, and you know, the county or the township can just do whatever because I can't afford this, right? So they just kind of give up a right because they're terrified.
Yeah, it takes a rare person in organizations like PLF to really fight these issues because it costs so much. It takes such an investment of time and money that the average person has to give up. At some point, the average person looks and says, well, you know, this may be worth, $100,000 or, whatever. Is it worth me fighting this for 12 years through the courts and employing an army of lawyers? But luckily, PLF provides our services free of charge. So when that equation comes up with one of our clients, of course it's worth it.
Well, exactly. And this is an important case because, this, I would imagine, probably goes on dozens of times a year in each state. And I would think from a property owner standpoint, there are just hundreds that just never fight this. So I would think this particular case would have standing room only when it comes to the arguments before the Supreme Court. I mean, I think this one's kind of huge, especially because, I mean, the county or this township could actually do a waiver, couldn't they? And just say, whatever this ordinance is doesn't apply to her. They could have at least done that, correct?
They could have done that. However, she's challenging the ordinances both as applied to her and the ordinance itself as it applies to everybody else. She's bringing what's called a facial challenge as well. So even if they waived its application to her, its constitutionality generally is also up for review. But they could just as easily as they could waive its application to her, they could rescind the ordinance. Yeah.
So they don't really have any problem, just kind of nailing this old woman to the wall here. Is there anybody in this township that is, kind of petitioned on her side? So this is kind of ridiculous.
I haven't heard of any, and that's sort of surprises me. I'll have to look into that. I'd be surprised if people, especially in Western Pennsylvania, in the rural area, weren't concerned about their own property rights as well.
Well, this case, Brian's got a lot of moving parts. So when Pacific Legal argues, do you just cover the takings part, or do all the other piece parts like compensation, or how it's a retroactive ordinance? I mean, can you kind of describe what your arguments would include, or would they necessarily be narrow?
Well, our argument to the U.S. Supreme Court is very narrow because the court accepted review on one question, and that's whether that state litigation requirement should be reversed or should be reconsidered. And so that'll be the focus of the argument, but it goes much broader than that because of the impacts of that rule and the access to justice angle, which is really what this is about. And something that PLF's been fighting over the years. I don't know if you recall our Sackett v. EPA victory.
Yes.
Just briefly for those who don't recall it, in that case, the EPA went to these residential property owners who lived pretty far upland from a lake and said that their property was connected to a wetland, therefore it was subject to federal regulation. And in order to even challenge that determination, the federal government was going to require them to file a permit that the average permit cost $250,000. And that was just so that they could even challenge the determination that this dry piece of flat property was a wetland. It's the same idea here, that if somebody wants to vindicate their Fifth Amendment rights in the federal courts, they're going to have to spend a substantial amount of money and years of time and potentially dodge all of these traps and pitfalls that are in the way, litigating a case in the state court fully before they can even march up to the federal courts and say, hey, enforce my rights. You adopted that 14th Amendment to say that states can't violate my federal constitutional rights. Now enforce it.
Traveling back here to poor Mrs. Nick, how was she actually advised of this whole ordinance and how it was going to affect her? Did she get some kind of letter that said, too bad, so sad? Or, how did that all happen?
Pretty much, if too bad, so sad, you mean an enforcement letter, yes. That's what she received, was an official letter from the town that said that we believe that there's an antique, that the stones here are markers for an antique grave site. Therefore, under this ordinance, you must hold your property open to the public. And if you refuse to, we will fine you. That's when this all started, was after that. She tried to go to the local county court to have that stricken. The county court bumped her out of court, and then they reissued another notice of violation, or another notice telling her that she had to hold her property open, and she took that to federal court.
So did somebody in this county do some historical, tribal, antiquities research that came across this, and they decided to go tread on her property to see what was there?
Well, from what we understand, there were a couple of, I'm not sure, I think they were amateur historians who were looking through some old Revolutionary War records, and they believed that property might contain a family grave where people who fought in the war were buried. And so they sent that to the township, and then the township sent out an inspector who entered her property without notice and searched around, found a pile of stones, and said that this is consistent, this could be a grave marker. And so on that determination, they said, this is now open to the public.
Without any real proof. So, I mean, this is almost one of those cases where if a woman had a shotgun, I believe I'd run the people off of the property. Sitting on her rocking chair is like going out there and going, wait. Does she have any family that's kind of helping her out here with this?
I do not know that. All I know is that Pacific Legal Foundation got involved pretty early in this case, and we've been representing her free of charge for since we got involved at the federal trial court level.
Okay, so we have this ordinance actually has created an easement, and there is no. And because they essentially have taken this easement, she still has to maintain the property and keep with its upkeep and whatever else. And because it's really their easement, they're not responsible for anything, correct?
No, that's one of the problems when government does this informally, and it's one of the secondary effects is when they don't go in. If they'd done it formally, there would have been a condemnation action. There would have been just compensation. They would have to maintain the easement. They would have to, for example, take out insurance, make sure that people don't trespass on her property, probably put up fences or something, make it official. In this circumstance where the government doesn't follow through with a condemnation action, who's liable? What if somebody trips on one of those?
Just going to ask you that.
Breaks? Yeah. Nothing would stop them from suing, from making a claim against Miss Nick or her insurance. Most certainly, if they went after the township would probably try to pull her in to pay for injuries. It becomes a real problem when the proper procedures aren't followed. Beyond the obvious constitutional harms, it becomes a logistical and practical nightmare for
liability.
The owner.
What if some of these cockamamie, whatever they are that decide they think it's a burial ground, what if they steal all these stones?
Well, I'm not sure what would happen there.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's a whole bunch of moving parts here, Brian.
Yeah.
That if you some of these Civil War types, or these researchers, these historians, say, oh well, maybe I want to have this for a memento, or I think this actually belongs in the Smithsonian or some Civil War museum. So they decide to go. There's 8 stones, and they decide to go grab all 8 of them. I mean. And then here comes the township again, or the county, and go, hey, what happened to this? And then, that's her fault because, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's another problem with doing things in this fashion and not doing them formally, is that a formal transfer of property through condemnation should define those sorts of contingencies.
Well, this is eminent domain without being eminent domain that is eminent domain.
Yeah, in the business, we call it inverse condemnation because they're doing it backwards. They're taking the property, they're exercising control over it without going through the proper procedures.
Have these historians that kind of made this accusation, this declaration, are they involved, or are they, part of the city township thing? I mean, is there some other kind of other relationship that we're not aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know the whole history of how this ordinance came into being, but all I know is that the city said that they received a public inquiry from historians to look into the possibility that this property might have some antique graves on it.
When you guys present this to the Supreme Court, are they going to be asking some of the crazy questions I'm going to be asking you, or do you think it'll just stay to the very narrow question at hand?
Oh, anything is open when you're at the court. Any question, particularly with this case falling toward, likely it will be argued in late October. So I'm not sure whether the topic of a graveyard will be, extremely interesting given the date or not.
I can just about imagine. I mean, if you got to present some of the background and context to this, they could be asking some of the crazy questions that I'm asking you. And, if they, how would they rule on this? Let's say, for instance, they come down on the side of Mrs. Nick on this. Then what happens? So they force the township to compensate her, rewrite the ordinance, or all of the above?
Well, that is, this case before the Supreme Court is on that very narrow issue as to whether she's required to litigate the case in the state courts before she can bring her federal claims to a federal court. But, the facts are the facts, and it may remand it to the court with direction to hear it. The court probably won't go, further than the question presented. So there's still going to be more fighting. Of course, the court can't order compensation. That would have to be in a trial later.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, this, I hope this thing's on C-SPAN or something, because this is a very interesting one here, especially when there's really no tangible paper trail on any part here, except that she gets a letter and lady, you're in trouble.
Yeah,
right?
And that's often the way these things play out. Is there's been some determination in City Hall, and then the property owner is looped in, and has to scramble to try to preserve their rights. And until the Supreme Court fixes that state litigation prong, they're going to be bouncing around the courts, hemorrhaging money and time trying to enforce their rights.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Brian Hodges at the Pacific Legal Foundation. You can find this case over at pacificlegal.org, and you can do Nick versus Scott, that's K-N-I-C-K, versus Scott Township, Pennsylvania. Brian, thanks so much. We're going to watch this, and, I guess we'll have to wait until October to see what the outcome is, but great job, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on.
All right. Well, we're coming your way, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you this 24/7 stream of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. We are a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. If you're able, please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. Your donation will go a long way in helping us continue to share the American voice. Thank you.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Hi, this is Captain Matt Bruce from the Captain's America Third Watch, and you're listening to Talk America Radio, the new dominant force in conservative talk radio.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia.
And Don Newen from Cowboy Logic Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't go to sleep every night completely fatigued from trying to restore America from the destruction that is taking place,
then you're simply not doing enough. Join us every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, for Cowboy Logic Radio.
let the restoration begin.
Donald Trump came to Washington vowing to drain the swamp and make government work for the American people. But the swamp creatures in D.C. aren't going down without a fight, and the deep state is determined to overturn the election and keep their gravy train rolling. In these turbulent times, it's critical for patriots to stay engaged and be prepared to defend this president. You can stay up to date on Trump's battle to make America great again by listening to America First Radio with Jim Dawes each weeknight at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Liberty Feed.
Hi, it's Mark Walters from Armed American Radio. You know, for nearly a decade, I've been educating, informing, and entertaining responsibly armed Americans. And during that time together, we've shared some ups and downs, haven't we? Trump's election saved our Supreme Court and no doubt the future of our gun rights for now. But now is not the time to lay down. The enemies of freedom are well-funded and more determined than ever. To keep up with the state of your gun rights, make sure to tune in to Armed American Radio right here on Talk America Radio, the new dominant voice in conservative talk radio.
This is Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience. When I'm not debating with Donna Fiducia about politics, I listen to Cowboy Logic Radio. Why, you ask? Because outside of my blog, founderscode.com, and my own radio show, the Denise Simon Experience, Cowboy Logic is by far the most entertaining and informative radio show on planet Earth. Plus, Don makes me feel guilty if I don't listen to his radio show every week.
You cannot retreat to your safe spaces. There are no therapy poodles allowed, especially when facing the truth. And that's just how we like it. Straight, hard, conservatarian talk, on the rocks, no chaser. Served up on the Adrian Slade Show. Small, limited government, constitutional conversations, exclusively on Talk America Radio. Every Saturday morning, 9 a.m. on Talk America Radio Liberty.
You're listening to your local news source, WLBB, News Talk 1330 and FM 106.3.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Yet we have another lawyer with us. This one is Tom Del Beccaro, a lawyer that I communicate with from time to time in text messages, sometimes in the middle of the night because there's a 3-hour difference between us. But that's okay. I take them. But Tom is, in fact, a lawyer in California. He is the author of The Divided Era. He is the host of the website Political Vanguard. and he is a contributor to Forbes magazine. And we have been chatting about the fact that Jeff Sessions made a trip to California to sue California on the 3 laws that they have on the book. So Tom decided that he would accept the invitation and be with us here on the Denise Simon Experience to discuss this lawsuit. So Tom, thank you very much for being here.
Happy to be on. Good to hear your voice.
Aw, that's sweet. Now, here's an interesting thing. California has, boy, they are all fighting back in a big, huge way. We got the mayor of Oakland, and we got the governor, and then we got the state attorney general, Javier Becerra, who himself, by the way, has got some nasty baggage back when he was in Congress. But nonetheless, the real position of the state of California is that no part of any government employee in the state of California at the state or local level can be an agent or a cooperative deputy, if you will, of immigration agents. So that is part and parcel of their major stand here, that immigration can go do their job. They can do whatever they want. We just aren't going to be part of the case. Period. End of report. Did I kind of get that right?
Close. Maybe we should take a little step backwards. You know, California is the perfect social justice state, at least according to the Democrats here. They are passing all these laws because they think they're creating the perfect place to live. Now, the problem with that, of course, is socialist paradises don't exist, but homelessness, poverty, lack of education does. California, of course, has about 34% of the nation's welfare recipients and only 17% of the population. That adds up to California being number 1 in poverty. And that is almost entirely ignored by the Democrats and the press until recently. Now, when the Trump administration came along, if you wanted to be a radical left Democrat to get ahead, then what you do is you attack the Trump administration morning, noon, and night. And it falls under that category. What they are doing with regard to sanctuary state and the like, even though the Obama administration deported more people than the Trump administration, even though the Obama administration, on average, I meant by that, obviously Trump's only been around a year, even though the Obama administration sued Arizona saying the state can't interfere or take over the obligations of the federal government, the Trump administration is bringing basically the same lawsuit, saying to California and its officials, you can't get in our way when we go to do this, because that's what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They literally put up these roadblocks that make it next to impossible for the federal government to enforce immigration laws. And this is fought along typical lines of American politics today. The Democrats claim if you're enforcing immigration laws, you're breaking up families. The Republicans sit on the sideline and say, no, we're trying to stop people from doing the wrong thing, but they aren't winning the argument because the Democrats have the better of it, at least in this state.
Let me talk about 10th Amendment here for a second, because I'm in a realm that's way out of my sandbox. But essentially, 10th Amendment says equal, separate but equal. But California is really, with what they're doing and fighting back against this lawsuit with Jeff Sessions, is they're nullifying federal law in the state by being essentially obstructionist, right?
Yes. And so let's go into that a little bit, because obviously the whole idea of nullification came from the Kentucky resolutions, which were drafted by Madison and Jefferson in the 1790s, I think. And the idea was that if federal law had gone too far, then the states have a right to say, no, it doesn't. It's invalid and can't be enforced within our borders. I think and I talk about this in my book, The Divided Era. The case that I love the most, or thought the most interesting, was Georgia, who said that a federal court couldn't enforce a judgment in Georgia, and they passed a law that said if anyone comes here to enforce it, they are subject to the death penalty.
Oy.
No one came. No one came. In California and the West, the left has suddenly rediscovered this notion of the 10th Amendment, that we don't have to abide by these federal laws. Of course, they would lose their mind if Alabama took a similar stance on abortion. So they're not so much trying to say that federal law doesn't exist. What they have done is pass their own laws that do crazy things like say that an employer cannot allow the federal government on their property to inspect related to immigration unless there's a warrant. And that directly conflicts with federal law, and therefore it will be struck down eventually.
Okay, now let's talk about the general welfare clause, because that one too gets thrown around, does it not?
It does. Of course, that has been radically abused over history, but go on.
Well, the point is that, you know, the Constitution, the federal government are saying for the general welfare of civilian, safety, it is part and parcel of why the Department of Justice is suing California. California is saying we have the same application, that we are protecting the general welfare of our local people, because parts of these people, they all have families. Well, I'm not convinced they all have families. You know, we keep saying they're breaking up families. Well, I'm not convinced of that. They haven't proven to me that every one of these people that are criminals for one reason or another that ICE is going after has a family member. They may not.
And so did the people who were raped and killed.
Correct.
By some of these people they're going after. Let me take another step backwards. One of the reasons we have a constitution, or two of them, was that during the interim period between revolution and the Constitution, we had 13 separate nation states with 13 different foreign policies, 13 different immigration rules, and it was out of control. And the states were arguing it pretty intensely with each other. There was actually hot fire, meaning gunfire, between at times, and Hamilton was convinced that we were headed towards multiple civil wars, and it made it impossible for us to trade with Europe, something we desperately needed because we were so in debt. And so the Constitution exists in part to create but one foreign policy residing under the powers of the federal government and one set of immigration rules with one long continuous border. The idea that California can inject itself to determine what the immigration laws are begs the question of, well, wouldn't we then have 50 separate potential immigration laws? And the answer is, of course, that we would. And so the federal government wins every time in court. Obama administration won. The Clinton administration won on these issues. And so these laws, to the extent, and this is the one risk involved here, to the extent that these laws have actually been used in any regard, meaning if there's a law in the book that's never used, that may well result in the court saying it's never been used, therefore the issue isn't ripe. But if these laws are ever used, they're going to get struck down.
You mean previously when California did cooperate? Or is that what you're saying, prior to
for instance, if California came out with a rule tomorrow that said no one is allowed to go to the voting booth wearing a "Don't Tread on Me" shirt, but no one ever actually did that or was arrested for it, you can't file a lawsuit saying that's an unconstitutional law. There actually has to be a plaintiff that attempted to do it.
Standing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the one concern I have about this lawsuit is that California may not have sought to impose some of these rules. But in any case, the reality is you can't do what California has done, and Libby Schaaf could well have, the mayor of Oakland, could well have obstructed justice.
I'm going to throw out a hyperbolic statement because it occurred to me the other night. If we had a entire fleet of Russian battleships at the coast of the Gulf of Mexico going from Galveston all the way over to Tampa, okay? And they had their guns pointed towards, every state from Texas to Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, we would begin to say that was some kind of an external threat, that it was a potential invasion, correct? And that we would take the federal government and those respective states would say, hey, National Guard, White House, this is what's happening. You better send some people. You better stop this.
Okay.
Okay. Now, California has 2.3 million illegals. Texas has 3.2 million illegals. We keep having this number that we have an estimated 11 million illegals. Tom, I would say that we've already had this invasion, and this invasion continues to happen, such that from time to time we've had these states, Texas, Arizona, under Jan Brewer and whatnot, they have asked the feds, build a wall, fix this, and even perhaps if you go back to previous governors of California, they said the same thing. So there was already standing, correct?
That's interesting. That's not related to the California suit. Look, in my view, there's no question that we have uncontrolled immigration. And the Trump administration is broadly trying to bring it back under control. But are you asking, do the states have the right to sue the federal government saying you're not enforcing federal immigration laws, therefore we will?
That could be part of it too. And we will do it on our own terms.
Yeah, the answer is no.
Okay.
That's not legally permissible. What may be interesting is, what's not legally permissible is for them to unilaterally adopt role of enforcing federal immigration law. That was what the Arizona case was in 2012. Mm-hmm. What may be interesting is if we get to the point where states sue the federal government claiming damages for the federal government's failure to do its job at all. But normally, governments are not liable for such things because under the rule that you can't sue the government for its failure to do something, because that's just the way what our system is like. I can't sue them saying you didn't have enough police officers, because we've long ago made a decision that governments can't be subject to private lawsuits outside of entering into a contract and not fulfilling it.
All right, now I'm going to really throw some sand in the gears, and so you're going to have to help me with this one too. Okay. We've got 300, I don't know how many, I see all kinds of numbers, sanctuary cities around the country. Mm-hmm. California has essentially declared itself, if not de facto, declared itself a sanctuary state.
Indeed, that's the law in Washington as well, state of Washington.
Now, we have all of these charity operations, most especially the Catholic Church, that are sanctuary nonprofits, that the federal government, under the resettlement laws that we have operating in Health and Human Services via the State Department, via the UN, that are getting federal dollars for sanctuary and for resettlement. Do you see where I just threw the sand in the gears? If Jeff Sessions, and I'm on his side, believe me, but I'm just kind of trying to play in the legal world, which I really have no place to being in the first place. But if Jeff Sessions is doing this for California, he could typically be saying to the Department of Justice, should be going over to Health and Human Services, is that you need to cut off all funding for all of these charitable organizations that are being sanctuary operations for the very same types of inventory of people, correct?
I see where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, of course, the problem with charities taking federal money, is they subject themselves to federal law.
This is such a because we don't know, but we may have a lot of those nonprofit organizations, the Catholic Church, the Methodist Church, and they have them under different kinds of names, but they're under the purview of those religious profits and nonprofits. They may be part and parcel working in cadence with Oakland mayors or Los Angeles mayors or Chicago mayors. Do you see what I'm saying? So
yeah,
it isn't as simple as what we're looking at here on the surface or we're reading about in the Washington Post. I would argue that it's a much more complicated issue because of the moving parts. And I believe that Eric Holder, who was hired by the California legislature to advise them on those 3 laws that Jeff Sessions is suing against,
yes,
he knows all of that too.
He does. Yeah, this is the problem with big government. Money, and then they try and decide everything that you do has to comply with their laws. And quite honestly, I'm a Catholic. I support the Catholic Church, but this is in part the Catholic Church's fault of pushing for big government that eventually becomes big enough to do what you're discussing.
All right, so now we have where does this go now? What are the steps? I mean, we start going to interrogatories or what? With Jeff Sessions suing the state, how does this play out in the immediate future, say in the next month or so? Does it go to the legislature?
No. The federal lawsuits tend to have a slow period of time. Unlike state lawsuits that admit that when you file a state lawsuit, there's an immediate round of discovery. When you file a federal lawsuit, it's much more civilized. They have this pattern of when each action is going to take. Honestly, this lawsuit's going to sit around.
Not going anywhere. It's a gesture.
For a while. It's meant to send a signal to other states and perhaps curtail some of the action. I think the next big thing that's going to happen is one of these criminals step out of ways and commit a crime, and the feds will come back at Libby Shaft and saying, this is on you, and we'll see what happens at that point.
Because this lawsuit has been filed, can the Department of Justice start subpoenaing documents immediately, just to kind of have it go from a gesture to some kind of action?
Not immediately, but in a couple of months, yes, and you'll see some of that. They have a right to talk to witnesses and build their case.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think this is a slow boat. Nothing much will come of this, and this is going to go all the way up to the Supreme Court. I'm sure the Ninth Circuit will rule against the Trump administration because that's what they do, and then eventually it'll get overturned. And by then, you're going to have the replacement of Justice Kennedy, if the rumors are true that he's going to step down, and you're going to have
governor.
Four very conservative Supreme Court justices, and one hard to tell what he really believes in justice, and of course that's the Chief Justice.
Plus, you'll have a new California governor.
Yeah, I don't really think that's going to make much of a difference on this particular issue. There already is a sanctuary state. He is radical and will remain out there. But at the end of the day, this is a pretty clear area where it's only the purview of the federal government to do this. And if they find substantial obstruction, or these laws are stopping the federal government from enforcing laws, then those laws will be struck down. It's going to be pretty simple.
How come Jeff Sessions didn't enjoin not only California, but Pennsylvania, New York, Illinois with this?
The answer to Pennsylvania is pretty simple. They have an important
election.
Special election.
Mm-hmm.
I think the answer is this could have been politically. So this does not play well for the Democrats in a lot of congressional districts.
Okay.
It actually doesn't play well for the Republicans in Southern California districts that are so up in the air for this year. But it forces the Democrats to take positions that are just ridiculous. I mean, if you're going to support Libby Schaaf and her ability to stop murderers from being arrested, you're a radical leftist. That's bad news. So what will the election be about this fall with respect to issues? It's going to be about how the Republican tax cuts worked and how the Democrats' plan is to raise your taxes. It's going to be, we're trying to get immigration under control. The Democrats want it out of control. And that works outside of California for a lot of congressional seats.
Which is probably the reason that Pelosi's been very vocal about this, but Dianne Feinstein has not. So she's taking measured steps. Pelosi, I don't think cares. Pelosi's finished.
But her opponent, her number one opponent, is very radical on this issue. So we're going to see how calm Feinstein remains, because he's going to want to push her. That would be Kevin De Leon.
What a fascinating time all of this is, and fascinating piece parts to it all. I'm glad that, Sessions did what Sessions did, but it was kind of like a shot across the bow, but it didn't miss the target. It just said, here it is, and we'll see where we go from here with the political side, because now it just makes people line up and make some immigration declarations, of which Javier Becerra, I think in this particular case, needs a particular second and hard, aggressive look.
Which won't happen, quite honestly.
I agree with you.
He's got higher ambitions, and if you're going to go somewhere in the radical left politics of California today, then what you have to do is attack the Obama administration, even when it's illogical.
Ladies and gentlemen,
unconstitutional.
Thank you, Tom. We've been speaking with Tom Del Beccaro, author of The Divided Era and host of the website politicalvanguard.com. We appreciate your time and your insight to this. It'll be fun to see where it all goes, and especially when it comes around to the midterms and then the general election. So keep the popcorn handy.
Interesting.
It should be. Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye. More coming your way, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us.
You can't handle the truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds AGPT, gas TOT 5-3.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Johnelle Rains is with us. Yay, Johnelle! She is the board member of USPIE, which is U.S. Parents Involved in Education. A previous guest several times, USPIE, that is, on the Denise Simon Experience. And Johnelle's been kind enough to come on and talk about a few things that are going on in legislation. I don't have, I've said it before, I don't have any kids in the system any longer. But I there's nothing worse than cheating kids and cheating families and cheating parents and cheating teachers for the generations to come. And so I kind of stay on this topic. So, Johnelle, thanks so much for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for bringing this to the forefront so that people can understand what's going on. Really appreciate it.
Johnelle, there's too much going on. And, when it comes to education, I think that the Department of Education has almost got just too much on its plate to really be addressing the things that are actually going on in the classroom. We got a discipline problem in classrooms across the country. Mm-hmm. We've got a syllabus problem in the classrooms going on around the country. But the bigger problem is we have these initiatives in...
I'm serious. It's something new. I taught for 29 years, first grade, and I would never go back to teaching in the public schools. I saw it toward the end when they first came out with No Child Left Behind. I saw what was coming down, that it was no longer teaching, it was teaching to the test. And, it took away your whole love of teaching and being with children and watching those little faces light up. It just took away from everything because everything was, I liken it to when I used to work in a cotton mill and I used to put riders on socks and the supervisor would come around and say, get your dozens up, get your dozens up. You get a pallet of socks and, you're trying to make production. And that's what they're pushing on teachers is instead of that, they're coming around saying, get your test scores up, get your test scores up, And that's all that they're focusing on. Not the whole child, not reaching out to each child as an individual and seeing what their needs are or anything like that. It's just get those test scores up. And, teachers are presented with bandwagon after bandwagon after bandwagon. No, you need to do this. And then the next year something else pops up. No, we can't do this. We want you to do this. And now we want you to do this. It's just constant bombardment with the teacher. So we can't blame the teachers. We really can't. This is all being top down, pushed down to them, and they just have to, in order to keep their job, they just have to keep their mouths closed and march to the beat. This latest thing that's being pushed right now, and it passed in our House in South Carolina, is House Bill 4596, which is a competency-based education bandwagon that they're pushing down now as the latest cure-all, fix-all to everything. And basically, if you can picture a classroom where all the children have their little headsets on and they're sitting in front of a computer screen, that's basically what we're talking about. And, the young child does not need that, especially, my years of experience with first graders, that's just not something that is something that would benefit a child in the least. And the scary parts about this education is they tout it as being great and that we're not going to be dependent on those standardized test scores so much anymore and there won't be so much. But the bottom line is, yes, the children are going to be assessed on a daily basis now with this competency-based education. So it's like testing every day. So they're like everything with the government lately. They like to tout it as one thing and say it's something, but in reality it's something else. And it's crazy. I'm just going to say that. It is crazy what they are subjecting our children to. They're not guinea pigs, but they treat them as guinea pigs. They're not human capital, but they treat them as human capital. And we've gotten way, way away from the purpose of education and what education is about. Bill Gates, I think, started this whole mess, and I blame him a lot, but it really started, back a good while ago as far as, in my opinion, the CBE, competency-based education, is nothing more than what used to be called I don't know if you recall, but it used to be called outcome-based education. They've just renamed it. That's how they do. They want to just, they take something and then they rebrand it, I think is the word they use now. We want to rebrand something and rename it, but it's really actually about the same thing.
Well, I was never a fan of International Baccalaureate either. I mean, it's kind of like the offshoot of all of this.
Yeah, it's all global. And the thing is embedded in it is the data mining. That's the huge thing that parents need to understand, that they are data mining children constantly, and it's indoor. I mean, it's bad enough at home when when your child's on their little iPad or whatever you've gotten them to do whatever, but in the school we're talking really, data mining. Their values, their beliefs, they get it in there. They kind of it's kind of a stealth, but even in the questioning, some of the how they word math questions, how they do. I mean, it's just unbelievable. We see evidence of it all the time. We have parents writing to us all the time, contacting me, telling me about, some of the things they're seeing in their child's classroom that just is more indoctrination instead of education. But, the thing is, in our school system, we have a fear problem. And the teachers fear speaking out. They know, if you talk to teachers in private and you talk to them, they know that they don't like the direction of these things, but they fear speaking out against it. Parents fear speaking to the teacher about it because they're scared the teacher might, take it out on their child. Or and principals, I know from firsthand experience being a teacher, principals have their way of keeping you, under control. If you don't want all the bad kids next year, or if you don't want, extra bus duty or be put on this committee or that committee, I mean, they have their ways of, keeping you in line. So there's a big fear factor, and no one's willing to stand up for the children. And we need parents to be brave, to speak up and to say, we're not going to, this is our tax dollars. And we're just going down this rabbit hole and this rabbit hole and this rabbit hole, and here's a boondoggle we're going to spend money on, and our test scores are just stagnant. And that's what they're all concerned about, is what those test scores are. But in the process of looking at test scores all the time, you are losing children to the love of wanting to learn.
Something. Yeah, it doesn't even necessarily have to be algebra, but they're losing the will to love something else that they really do love.
Exactly.
Because they're just giving up. They're becoming, I'm hearing for what you're saying to me is this is a robotic kind of it's a factory, and we're building clones, right?
Yeah, pretty much. It's like, what they're saying is they want children to be workforce ready. That's the goal now. It's just workforce ready. There's some children that have other gifts. Children are a gift from God, and God gives everybody a certain gift. And as an educator, I feel like education the teacher should be helping that child unwrap their gift, learn what it is that they're good at. What they're doing now with this competency-based education is they are channeling children based on test scores, what they think this child should be pursuing or what this child should be doing, based on, what they think, as opposed to what the child's dreams are. And
I would think it would be a structured competency test. In other words, you take out a lot of competencies and you narrow them down to, the 3 or 4 that are, spin-offs or extractions of Common Core. And so you have to pick one of these 4 over here, and you can't do music or arts or all this other, right? Is that right?
And they're wanting to push it down. Like I said, I can maybe see this model, in college. They've used this kind of thing, competency based in college, and even in some of the high school courses, I could maybe see once a student on their own has decided what they want to be. But as a young child, they need to be experiencing all kinds of things, and it needs to be a lot of movement involved, not sitting in front of a screen. It's just I just fear for the children in our public schools right now, and like I said, I hate it for the teachers because they're being pulled in every which way. But anyway, this legislation we only have a matter of a couple of weeks to kill it in the Senate. It already passed the House. So we're asking people to contact the main people that in the Senate who will be looking at this legislation, and that's what we're wanting people to reach out and call. If you'll give me a minute, I will tell you. It's John Corson, and his phone number is 803-212-6250. Harry
Say it again.
Keeler.
Yeah. Say his number again.
Well, all of it's 803 area code. All right. His number is 212-6250. Harry Peeler, his is 212-6430. Larry Grooms, 212-6400. Greg Hembry, 212-6016.
Now, Johnelle, when we call these people, we're wanting to stop. Give us the bill.
Kill House Bill 4596.
Okay.
And if you want to go to I do a page called Stop Common Core in South Carolina on Facebook. Mm-hmm. We've got that action plan listed there. We've also got the action plan listed on South Carolina Parents Involved in Education, which is SC PI. That's a Facebook page there as well. So those are places you could go right now, and all these people's names are listed.
Johnelle, are other states doing something like this competency-based education?
Oh, it's all over. It's being pushed, yes, big time, yeah, everywhere.
And
so it's touted as being the best thing since sliced bread, but
And so have you guys at USPIE talked to, some of those other states and said, what is happening here?
I know Sherry does. Sherry Few is who I'm speaking of. She's the CEO of United States Parents Involved in Education, and they have weekly, I think, pretty much, I know for sure, there are like 15, maybe more than 15 states involved, and their leaders in those states, they get on a conference call. And yes, we've been fighting this competency-based education all over the United States. Yep. And this bill was brought up by Representative Neil Collins, who has no children of his own. He's so it's very interesting, because when you get to looking at it, you would think, it's like, well, Gary Clary had a bill for dyslexia that passed, which I thought was a good bill. But, his dog in the game was he has a grandson that has dyslexia. So, you can kind of see those kind of things come up, in legislation when you have a personal interest in it. But Representative Neil Collins has no dog in the fight, so to speak. He has no children, no grandchildren. He's just a young little whippersnapper who's been influenced somehow, some way by this, and he gone to the what I call academia workshops where they try to indoctrinate the legislators into what their latest.
Well, that's kind of where I was headed here. I mean, Gates Global Initiative there's got to be some money or some donations Do we know what that looks like?
I don't have any numbers, with me, but yes, anytime you're questioning why are they doing, well, it's always follow the money and look at it and see what's going on. Well, you can see, if every child's got to be put in front of a computer, and the software that's involved, and all, there's huge profits, huge money making going on. I don't have any numbers, Denise, with me as far as how much money we're talking about. I know I haven't retained it. I'm not good at retaining numbers, but I have looked at, if you go on legislation, a lot of times if you go to the South Carolina legislation site, they will have like a link to where you can see where they, the cost of what they think, this particular legislation might cost, in the long run doing it. Mm-hmm. So, but I didn't retain the numbers.
Well, on the GatesFoundation.org website, it clearly says right there, K through 12 education strategy overview. And so,
right.
They're, they have a separate website for K through 12 education. So,
right.
It is,
There's a group that our legislators are listening to, which they need to stop listening to. It's called Palmetto Promise Institute, and it supports competency-based education. And for some reason, this is who they go to. One of the questions I like to ask legislators is, given a certain subject, who would you seek advice from, kind of thing. That kind of gives me a clue as to where they're going. And this Palmetto Promise has ties to, things like Jeb Bush's education program, who was a heavy Common Core pusher. So you need to look behind the scenes and see who's who and, what they're pushing. And our legislators are leaning too much on this one group, Palmetto Promise, and they really need to be reaching out to Sherry Few is who they need to be reaching out to, because I would give anything if she had gotten elected superintendent as opposed to Molly Spearman. But that's not, we can't change that now. But we're traveling in the wrong direction. Everything's going toward they rebrand, name it. It's just like, you would not believe how many people in South Carolina think we got rid of Common Core. It is not so.
No,
it is not so. But I see it all the time. They think, we got rid. Even teachers will tell you that. Oh, we don't do Common Core. Oh, yes, ma'am, you do. It's over 90% in line with Common Core. They just renamed it to South Carolina College Career Ready, But it's amazing to me how they rebrand, rename things, and people think, okay, that sounds really good. Let's do that. But like I said, it's another boondoggle. It's another thing that teachers are going to have to learn how to do, and we're going to have to spend money training them on how to do this. And what are we going to see as the results of this?
Now,
I'm telling you,
earlier,
it's not going to be
Johnelle,
good.
You spoke about, sitting in front of computer screens with headsets on.
Right.
So in some ways we have replaced the textbook, and that probably could be a good thing right there, with some things that are online. You've got some software there that are channeling trends. Has anybody actually looked who the producers are and what the content is of what these kids, regardless of their age, are sitting in front of with their headsets on, being little robots?
I know that Representative Collins has been, I think it's Lexington County, that there's a certain school in Lexington County that he touts as being the model, so to speak, for this competency-based education. So I know they have gone in, but as a former teacher, I can tell you that that a lot of times, unless you really get into something and you look at the results, and things look good. Everything looks, this looks really good, but we want to see the return on investment. What is this actually accomplishing? And then we read articles. If you go online and you look up the pros and cons of competency-based education, you will see that lots of states who have already started this are like going, this is not something that we thought about or enough, So it's like that in education all the time, Denise.
Well,
it really is.
I'm looking at a paragraph here on this Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and it says, we'll do this by investing in networks of schools to solve common problems schools face by using evidence-based interventions that best fit their needs and data-driven continuous learning. That's all you need to know. They're fun words, but words do matter. So they're admitting here, and then standards align curriculum and tools, accompanied by professional learning opportunities. What's a professional learning opportunity? Oh, Johnelle.
I know. But
I think we need to do a documentary.
Really? I think it's our goal in United States Parents Involved in Education has been for the past, is to try to get these federal mandates stopped. Just cut the head of the snake off, get us out of the federal mandates, and then we can start worrying about these state educrats and what they're doing in our, it's unbelievable. But first, we thought we had done a good thing. We fought the good fight. We got our legislators to get rid of Common Core, we thought. But all they did was turn around and rebrand it. And we knew that was going to happen, especially when we knew who got elected as far as superintendent, because we knew she was a former Democrat. We knew where her loyalties were. And we knew this was not going to go anywhere. So, yeah, we're in trouble, and we didn't get here overnight though, Denise. It has taken us a while to get here.
Yeah,
and it's going to take a while to get us back to being what we should be doing in education. But right now, it's a mess. And my advice has been to anybody that will listen to me is homeschool. That is my advice to anybody, and it still is. That's the only way you're going to have local control right now is to homeschool, because other than that, you don't have any local control over what's going on. I've spoken to my school board I don't know how many times, and they point the finger at the state, and the state points the finger at the U.S. Department. I mean, you have nowhere to go because they all point the finger at somebody else. So, best thing to do, in my opinion, is homeschool. But we need to worry about those parents who can't afford to homeschool, maybe both are working or a single parent, and they think right now that they can't do this. But I know for a fact, I've got one friend of mine who works full time, but yet she homeschools. She found the way to do it. So, I mean, there are ways now that you can take control and take care of your child through homeschooling, especially in South Carolina, because it's fairly easy to do in South Carolina. Some states not so much, but yeah. We've got to help those children that are in there though, and try to get some of this legislation stopped so that they're not guinea pigs again and again and again.
I mean, this is a generational thing. I mean, we're gonna go through a generation and a half to unwind all of this and kind of go back to a syllabus that is just not geared to cyber world or artificial intelligence or data mining. I mean, that's just where everything seems to be headed, and these kids their options are, went from hundreds down to 2 or 3. And so are the parents.
Oh, I know. It's and I guess the thing is they're not listening to parents enough. They're not listening to the actual teachers. I mean, if you think about it, the stakeholders, they keep using that word all the time, the stakeholders in education. Well, there's only 3, the child, the parent, and the teacher. And those 3 people are getting ignored completely. That's my theory. I mean, it's all these other, like I told you, educrats or academia or whatever. Some people that haven't been in a classroom, and Lord knows, and some of them haven't ever been in a classroom. Or like I said, Neil Collins, who doesn't even have any children, that just don't have a clue. They don't know. And in order to really know what's going on, you need to look at the major stakeholders, which, like I said, are the child and the parent and the teacher, and get their input. They'll tell you they're getting their input, but they're not getting their input at all. They just send out a survey and make you think you have some input, but you really don't. Or the survey they give you is way over most parents' heads, and they don't even know how to read the survey because they're using all these academia type words, So, Johnelle
Raines, a board member at USPIE, and ladies and gentlemen, please trot on over to uspie.org. Stop Fed Ed. I mean, everything we've talked about is there. And Johnelle, thank you. Come back. I mean, I'm going to stay. I'm staying with you kids over there, and we're going to do this.
And go to the Facebook page for those senators who to contact. It's Stop Common Core in South Carolina.
Thank you, Johnelle. And ladies and gentlemen, more coming your way.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you this 24/7 stream of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. We are a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. If you're able, please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. Your donation will go a long way in helping us continue to share the American voice. Thank you.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Let me talk to you black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
This is Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience. When I'm not debating with Donna Fiducia about politics, I listen to Cowboy Logic Radio. Why, you ask? Because outside of my blog, founderscode.com, and my own radio show, the Denise Simon Experience, Cowboy Logic is by far the most entertaining and informative radio show on planet Earth. Plus, Don makes me feel guilty if I don't listen to his radio show every week.
You're listening to your local news source, WLBB, News Talk 1330 and FM 106.3.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've got Seton Motely with us. He's on a tear. Seton Motely is the founder and CEO of lessgovernment.org. He's been with us often, and he's just such a good guy to have on because he's watching things just all over the place, and he's mad. So we're going to cover some UN climate change stupidness. We're going to cover some deregulation, maybe going back to some regulation, unless people are paying attention, and then net neutrality. So with that, welcome, Mr. Seton.
Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm good. It's a little chilly where I am.
In Florida? You don't want to hear what it's like up here.
I know I don't. But so what? We haven't gotten by this net neutrality stuff yet at all.
No. Of course, when the FCC repealed it in December, it takes a while to get to where it's officially a new rule. They have to publish it in the congressional record, in the Federal Record, and that just happened last week. So then 9 million lawsuits start, and of course, before even that, you're familiar with the Congressional Review Act. It was passed by Newt Gingrich as a way to repeal regulations. Well, now the Democrats are trying to use it to reimpose regulations, which violates the law. And if were I a lawyer, that would be one of the things I would be arguing in this case, is that they're using the law wrong. But the way the Congressional Review Act works is you need a simple majority in the House, and you need just 30 in the Senate. So, of course, the Democrats have 49 Senate seats. They got to 30, they got to 49 to get this thing on the floor. So now it's going to have a vote. And it's going to have a vote within 60 calendar days from the publication of the order. And this not just in the Senate, but it's got to be voted on in the House and the Senate and sent to the President. Well, there's no shot of this thing passing the House. There's just not. So this is entirely a waste of time. The Democrats are trying to message on it because they think it's going to be very important to millennials in the election. I'm a little dubious. They're too busy eating Tide Pods. But not only that, The problem is they're putting pressure on some wobbly Republicans, and the first one to go wobbly is not going to be a shocker to your audience. It's Susan Collins of Maine.
Oh, who?
Yeah, and she said she's for it. She hasn't sponsored the bill. She says she's for it, and that puts them at 50, and now they need one more, and they've been protesting 8 other Republican senators, Dean Heller in Nevada, Marco Rubio, although I don't know why they're protesting Marco Rubio, because he's on the relevant Commerce Committee in the Senate, and he's been great on this issue. That seems to be an even bigger waste of time than this entire process. But there's, Orrin Hatch and Lisa Murkowski in Alaska and John Kennedy in Louisiana, was playing footsie for a while and maybe supporting it, and then all of a sudden has supported put forward a Republican version of Marsha Blackburn's bill from the House on a net neutrality bill to make this thing finally go away. So he may be back where he's supposed to be on this Congressional Review Act thing. And it's just, these idiots haven't passed a budget through regular order since the Tide Pod generation was born. And yet here we are wasting all this time on something that, Trump has repeatedly cited the repeal of the Obama power grab on the internet as another great example of his deregulatory nature of his administration. So there's no way it's going to get out of the House. They may get out of the Senate, but there's no way it's getting out of the House, and there's no way in a million years that Trump is going to sign this thing. So, God, can we please work on some actual legislation?
Okay. Well, I mean, Trump has a good record, and I say that a lot of these things that have been deregulated, I don't think are getting nearly enough press. I mean,
well, they don't want to. The media knows that it would be very, very popular.
Yeah.
So they'd rather spend time talking about Stormy Daniels. Look, there's this. How on Facebook, I've done a lot of TV and stuff, so you get requests from people who you don't actually know. You know what I mean? They're not people you actually know in real life. And there's this really interesting, very left-wing girl from New York who totally gets the joke on a couple of things at least. One of them is she thinks this Trump-Russia collusion thing is just ridiculous and stupid and wrong, and she even thinks that Hillary Clinton did, which is more than we can say for the House Republican caucus. Did you just see that they released a report and they said Hillary didn't collude with Russia?
And and Trump didn't either.
Well, but that's obvious, and it's just as obvious as that Hillary Clinton did. And this leftist girl from New York gets it better than the House Republicans do and has more guts than the House Republicans do. And then the other thing she realizes is totally stupid is she said she was watching MSNBC. She said, top of the hour, more news on Stormy Daniels. And then 20 minutes later, buried in the report, 30 seconds on, Trump has somehow managed to pull a meeting with Kim Jong-un of North Korea out of his hat. She says, major step towards denuclearization of North Korea, much less important than Stormy Daniels. So, and this is just some leftist random woman in New York. It's great. It's fabulous. And yet the Republicans can't get she messages better than the Republican caucus. So they can't talk about a lot of the stuff Trump's doing, actually doing the substance of his administration, because a lot of it would be very, very popular with people. So they have to constantly fixate, on this nonsense that is either irrelevant or a lie or both.
Well, a couple of days ago, you were on the bandwagon of the whole climate change UN report.
I was. What are you talking about?
Yeah. You had a little bit of a fit. Well, we have all these things that are happening in the United Nations. And then I would say they're really just reports. Nobody seems to necessarily want to do anything about it. And I don't see a lot of pushback coming out of this administration on where monies are going in the UN. Do you?
Well, I don't know what Nikki Haley's doing on that. I'm very glad that they pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. That was a very positive move. I wish he was fighting on more fronts, but then, I'm starting to get more sympathetic to the notion that, he's got a lot of stuff going on, and he's fighting on a lot of fronts that he shouldn't have to be fighting on. And he's, at some point you have to say, I'd love to see him be doing 143 things at once, but we may have to satisfy ourselves that he's doing 72. And is he the most organized thinker on the planet and, most orderly in his, execution? No, but he's the one that got us here. None of the other 16 guys he ran against would have beaten Hillary Clinton. And he's the most conservative administration since at least Calvin Coolidge. Ladies and gentlemen, he is way more conservative of an administration than Ronald Reagan was. Way more. Considerably more. So, listen, I have a lot of people I really respect who are upset that more isn't happening on this issue or that issue, and I'm that way too. But I think if we cajole him, he's the type of guy that if we, cajole him and thank him for what he's doing, I think he'll spread his wings and start doing more and more. It's very difficult. He's fighting the media. He's fighting many members of his own party. He's fighting a completely lockstep Democrat party. He's fighting the UN. He's fighting the global establishment. He's, I'm not much of a slack cutter, but, cut the guy a little slack.
Well, on the other hand, I'm not much of a slack cutter either. And mostly because he's not the only person there. He has got, a massive team of people.
Who are very good. One of my big disappointments is Jeff Sessions. I don't know why more isn't coming out of the Justice Department as far as whether it's illegal immigration, whether it's visa rollback. I'm for importing 5 people a year. That's it. We have 250 million people. We don't need any more. Certainly some sort of prosecutorial action on the last administration. I mean, as much as we've learned about what Obama and Clinton and Kerry now, John Kerry, Secretary of State second term, and Comey and Mueller, what these people have done, the criminal wrongdoing in which they've engaged, and none of these people are being investigated or questioned. Unless they are, we just completely don't know. I'm happy he's suing California for, sanctuary state status. Illinois just volunteered to be next in line. If you saw that, they just signed some sort of sanctuary state bill
Illinois,
or legislation.
Yeah, Illinois, yep.
And by the way, a Republican governor, speaking of the enemy within the party. I have a friend of mine who took the chief of staff job for that guy, 6 or 8 months ago, and quit like 2 weeks later. I do not know any of the details of why she quit, but she wasn't there very long at all. I'd like to see more out of that. I'd love to see the State Department completely crushing the refugee resettlement racket, because that's just
it's a huge racket.
Fake Christian and Catholic charities taking a bunch of government money and it's a Pez dispenser. They get more money for each refugee they resettle. Yes. There's no thought process as to, do we need them? Should we take them? Do we want them? It's just, it's an ATM. The more you bring, the more you get. And so that needs to be completely ended. The high dollar, the high skill visas are a scam. The low skill visas are a scam. I'd like to see that to me is the number one issue on which he ran and won. That was immigration. That was the issue when he came down the escalator. I was watching it live, and as soon as he swerved into illegal immigration on his announcement, I almost got whiplash turning to the television, and I immediately put on social media, he just won the presidency. And so that to me is the issue. If he wants to really, go forward, he needs to lock down a bunch more, issues on immigration and illegal immigration, and then be very public and vocal about doing so.
Because we have the midterms coming.
This footsie with DACA amnesty is hurting him. Go ahead.
I agree with you there. I agree with you, but it's not gonna. It expired. He gave the House.
Some random leftist judge say this is one of the most amazingly activist dumb rulings I've ever heard of in my life. Barack Obama spends 6 years saying he can't do anything unilaterally because of the Constitution. Then he does something unilaterally. Trump comes in and undoes what Obama did unilaterally, which Obama said for 6 years, I can't do. And then the judge says, you can't undo what he did. That is
that's the interest. Seton, that's what's fascinating, because the DACA, the first word means deferred. The second word is action, deferred action. So it is now requiring some action, of which Trump took until he was kneecapped.
Right, but just on the judicial ruling, Obama readily admitted for years he couldn't do X. He then did X. Trump undoes X, and a judge says, you can't undo X. That's insanity. That is judicial tyranny. That has nothing to do with the rule of law. Obama's original order didn't have anything to do with the rule of law. We've passed these laws. He unilaterally changed them without Congress. And then to have Trump come in and, just basically go back to the laws we've passed that are on the books and have a judge say he can't do that, it's unconstitutional, is insanity.
Well, I guess this White House has decided that they're just going to allow it to go through the legal process. And, at some point, I think if they get to the Supreme Court, they'll be fine. I really do. This is one of those things where, of course, most Supreme Court rulings depend upon what Anthony Kennedy has for breakfast that morning. But yes. I think there's some precedent from him on this issue that would lead us to be somewhat optimistic as to how he would rule on this, because we know, the other 8, it's pretty much, it's like playing Texas Hold'em on television. We know their cards. We know their whole cards on just about any issue that comes up. But I think Kennedy has some precedent on this issue where he would rule with, the rule of law and the Constitution on this particular issue. Well, they have to kind of hope they get it on the docket, because, you've got the whole October session, and then it needs to happen
and then. It peters out. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
so
and
they're working against the calendar.
That's for Don McGahn and the other lawyers, the White House lawyers that aren't working on, Russia collusion. I'm starting to think that's almost as, it doesn't have the duration and it can't have the longevity, but this is approaching global warming as far as one of the greatest scams in the history of the world.
Well, yeah, and that's all about the money too when it comes to the global warming thing. I actually said it was the UN. You had done the piece on Harvard study, so I misquoted it.
I don't know. I've seen this video around for a couple months on Facebook. I think the guy's name was Don Pena. It's an older guy in a very nice suit on a stage somewhere. And it's just so funny to watch this older guy in this suit cursing every 15 words. Some woman asked him about climate change and how the rich are benefiting from it and benefiting from not addressing it. And he wouldn't let her, the guy sitting next to him had to let her finish her dumb question. But of course he's heard the question 9 million times. It's the same stupid question every time. So he's just we didn't even want to have to hear all of it before he addressed it. And one of the interesting, he said all the right things, all the things that are correct about the scam. But one of the interesting wrinkles he put in, because she said the rich, was he said the number one builders state right now in the United States is Florida. Mm-hmm. And they're building all along the coast, and none of them are mentioning global warming. He said in the prospectus for any investment proposal, if they were actually concerned about real global warming and climate change, they would put it in the prospectus. No banks are doing that. He said if the water rose the minimum of what the left is threatening, which is 10 feet, all of Britain would be underwater. You couldn't get a 30-year mortgage in London if the banks believed it.
Or if you could survive the poison.
Because nobody would be around to finish paying the mortgage.
Yes.
So he said, so you're accusing the rich of doing this. Believe me, they're self-interested just like everybody else, and they're making 30 and 40-year loans because they know it's a scam. So I just thought that was an interesting little new way of looking, another angle to look at this thing.
Well, if you were to have an audience tomorrow for 30 minutes at the White House with Trump, come on.
That's a fabulous question. I would spend the first 10 laying out all the different things he needs to be doing on immigration. Are you doing? And again, he may be doing stuff that we don't know. So I think a lot of those questions would have to be answered by Jeff Sessions and Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, respectively, because the State Department handles all the visas and the refugee resettlement. Mm-hmm. But I'd be asking about all the things we just discussed, refugee resettlement, visas, dramatically reducing those. He's right on chain immigration. He's right on the number of people that are coming in being reduced. I'd spend about 10 minutes on 8 minutes on immigration. I'd then ask him about, prosecutions, and again, this is Sessions. What the hell are we doing about all these law breakers in the previous administration? Going back to, I don't think the statute of limitations is up on the IRS abusing us as conservatives and Tea Party members. What's he doing about prosecuting Fast and Furious, which was dumping a bunch of weapons into the hands of Mexican drug cartels along just south of our open border. I'd spend at least 6 or 7 minutes on what are you prosecuting on the previous administration. There needs to be prosecution.
Yes.
He would go through the roof if the rule of law was being reestablished.
Planned Parenthood.
Planned Parenthood. Why are we still funding this?
Yes.
Another great Facebook meme. If the Republicans are owned by the NRA, the Democrats are owned by Planned Parenthood.
There you go.
And that's a 30-second question. It's not a throwaway, but it's a short question. I would definitely go into a lot of the domestic policy stuff.
Obamacare, that we're going to bail out the insurance companies again.
I would stop. Yes, I would ask him why are you even considering that, and if so, why? It's unconstitutional. The Congress never allotted any money for that, and all spending has to begin in Congress, and it never had in that instance. Obamacare, some other domestic issues that haven't been addressed yet. I'm with him 100% on the tariffs, not with the tariffs per se, but as the first step in moving away from these awful trade deals we've been cutting for 50 years. And by the way, the worst legacy of Richard Nixon is not Watergate, the third-rate burglary in the midst of an election. He won 49 states anyway. What was he going to win, 43 if he hadn't done it? I mean, come on. But his worst legacy item is starting to feed the snake that is China.
Yes.
That was his worst mistake. And now, Trump talks about it. Trump's right on it, but I don't think the trade imbalance in and of itself is not a problem. The problem is the way the world has set itself up for the last 50 years. They don't get punished for coming into our markets. We get punished for going into theirs. So businesses by the millions of jobs have moved to those countries. And that, of course, impedes us because, A, we lose a bunch of businesses that should be fighting for less government, and they're not, because now our greater domestic government is actually a business advantage to them because it's hurting their competitors, not them. And they're shipping unfettered goods into our number one market while getting protection from the foreign governments in which they just relocated. So I would definitely go, I would give him a little bit of a messaging lesson on this is how the better way to talk about it. I think he doesn't have enough people around him who agree with him on that issue to help coach him on how to talk about it. So I very hubristically offer my services to just briefly explain to him a better way to talk about this, because I think he's exactly right on the issue.
Well, we are going to have a military parade.
Oh, yeah, again, another side issue where they keep comparing him to every dictator on the planet because he wants to have a military parade. Look, I was born in Alexandria, Virginia. I grew up here. And I remember going to see the hostages come back from Iran in 1980, or I think it was 80 or 81. I think it was 80. It was 80. And something like that is very good for the country. And just because he wants to do it with the military, he's proud of the military. I don't see why this is, it's one of my favorite movie lines.
They've changed it up quite a bit because now it's Veterans Day and it's really going to be more of a historical parade and not one that's going to compete with, Macron or Kim Jong-un. So, I mean,
once again, his Queens, New York way of speaking, his sentiment and his idea are usually pretty good. It just doesn't always come out, mellifluously through his mouth. But the sentiment behind almost all of it is very, very good. And that too, like you said, it turns into a Veterans Day thing, and it's not, the left would say, oh, it's his staffers talking him back down to a more reasonable position. Well, yeah, I guess, but the fundamental thought behind it, the original idea was his, and it was a good one.
Ladies and gentlemen, go visit lessgovernment.org. We've been speaking with Seton Motely. Isn't he fun to kind of close out the show with? So thank you, Seton. Come back again.
A pleasure. Thank you very much. I now dive into my kitchen cabinet.
There you go. Better places to be. All right, bye.